I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribe and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth. Let's get into it. Before I start, here's the red flag I wish I had named sooner. When your partner talks about ambition, listen for whether they mean growth or whether they mean status. There's a difference between someone challenging you and someone measuring you. In my case, my wife didn't want a conversation about goals. She wanted a scoreboard, and she kept moving the goalposts until I was always losing. If you ever catch yourself shrinking your work, your pace, or your values just to keep someone pleased, pause. That's not motivation. That's control wearing a nicer outfit. If you've ever heard someone say you're not ambitious enough, and it felt like a threat instead of feedback, you're going to want to hear how this plays out. Drop a quick comment. Was that a warning sign for you or motivation? And if you want more real narrated relationship dramas like this, share and subscribe, because this one gets painfully specific, and the ending is not what people expect. The first time I heard the phrase, not ambitious enough, it wasn't shouted. It was said like a diagnosis, like my wife, Imani, was reading my chart. We were standing in our kitchen in Tacoma, Washington, the kind of gray winter morning where the sky looks like it forgot to wake up. I had flour on my hands because I was kneading dough. Saturday cinnamon rolls were my thing. Imani leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, and said, "Darius, you're talented. You're just not ambitious enough." I wiped my hands on a towel and tried to laugh it off. I run the maintenance team for the city's light rail. I'm ambitious enough to keep people from getting stranded. I thought that would earn at least a smile. Instead, she sighed, soft-practiced. "That's the problem," she said. "You think being stable is the same as moving forward." I took a breath, trying to keep my voice even. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer. She just looked past me, like the future was somewhere behind my shoulder, and I was blocking her view. Imani and I were both black, both raised by parents who worked hard and expected more. Her mother ran a small daycare out of their house in Kent, always singing gospel while she folded towels. My dad was a postal clerk who carried himself like a man who refused to let the world bend him. I married Imani because she felt like fire, organized, quick, certain. She was a project manager for a construction firm, the kind that talked in timelines and deliverables. I was quieter. I liked building things that lasted. We'd been married 4 years. No kids yet by mutual agreement. Though lately her version of mutual sounded more like a memo. Our house was a modest 2-story in a neighborhood where the lawns were small, but the pride was big. Every Sunday, I washed my grandfather's old pocket watch and put it back in the drawer like a ritual. He gave it to me when I graduated from trade school. "Time is the only thing you can't earn back," he told me. Imani called it sentimental clutter. My best friend, Caleb, came into our lives long before Imani did. We met at a summer program at Seattle Central when we were 19. He was the guy who could talk his way into a closed studio and out of a parking ticket. He studied marketing, had a smile that pulled people in. I studied electrical systems and mechanical repair because I liked problems that had answers. Over the years, we stayed close. Sunday hoops, Thursday dinners at a diner off Pacific Avenue, a rhythm that felt unbreakable. Imani liked Caleb at first, maybe too much. She said he was bright, driven, strategic. She'd ask him questions about his job in corporate sales like she was interviewing him for a higher purpose. When he laughed, she laughed a little louder than she needed to. I ignored it because I trusted both of them, and because I didn't want to be the kind of man who saw betrayal in every smile. Plus, Caleb was always calling me brother like it meant something sacred. I held on to that. The ambition talk didn't start as a weapon. It began as suggestions. Imani would slide her laptop toward me after dinner and show me job postings. Supervisor role, better salary, better benefits. I'd look and say, "I'm already supervising people." She'd tilt her head. Not at that level. If I mentioned wanting time to train the younger guys on my crew, she'd say, "That's nice, but when are you going to stop mentoring and start climbing?" The words were polished, but they scratched. One night in early spring, she brought it up at the barbershop, my barbershop, like it was community news. I was in the chair, cape on, hearing the Clippers buzz while Reggie argued about basketball behind me. Imani walked in with a box of pastries, smiling at everyone. Then she said, loud enough for the room, "Y'all, tell Darius he's too comfortable. He won't even apply for the regional supervisor position." A few guys chuckled, like it was harmless teasing. I felt heat crawl up my neck. On the drive home, I told her, "Don't do that." She stared straight ahead, hands tight on the steering wheel. "Do what?" "Encourage you." I kept my tone steady because I didn't want to fight. "Embarrass me in front of people." She exhaled. "If embarrassment is what it takes to get you moving, maybe it's necessary." That sentence landed in me like a small, sharp stone. I watched the wipers smear rain across the windshield and wondered when my wife started speaking to me like an employee who wasn't meeting expectations. Caleb became a regular presence after that. He'd come by with craft coffee, acting like we were all friends hanging out. He'd sit at our kitchen table and talk about expanding streams of income. And Imani would nod, eyes bright. "Have you ever considered consulting?" Caleb asked me once. "You know systems. You could charge companies." I said, "I like working in the public service. It matters." Caleb leaned back. "Public service is noble, but nobility doesn't build wealth." Imani smiled at that like he'd read a verse she believed in. I made a decision then, my first big one, and I chose peace over confrontation. I told myself it was maturity. I didn't accuse Imani of anything. I didn't tell Caleb to back off. I simply started applying for the supervisor role to show I was listening. I stayed up late filling out forms, polishing my resume, and asking my union rep for advice. The whole time, a quiet question hung over me. Was I doing this because I wanted it, or because my marriage required it as proof of worth? When I got an interview, Imani reacted like I'd finally passed a test. She hugged me quickly, like a manager patting an intern. "Good," she said. "That's what I'm talking about." I wanted her to say she was proud of me, not proud of my potential paycheck. But I swallowed it. I told myself marriage was teamwork, and sometimes teamwork meant taking feedback. Still, when I looked at her face, I saw relief, not love. That worried me more than any insult. Around that time, I started noticing little gaps in her stories. She'd say she was meeting a client in Federal Way, but her car's GPS history would show downtown Tacoma. She'd come home smelling like a different perfume, something citrusy and expensive. When I asked, she'd say, "A colleague hugged me," like the answer was obvious. Caleb started canceling our Thursday diner nights, claiming work trips. Then I'd see photos on social media of him at local networking events. Events Imani also attended, always the same weeknights, always coincidence. I wasn't proud of how I handled my suspicion. I didn't investigate right away. I tried to outwork the discomfort. I took extra shifts. I led safety training. I fixed a busted signal relay in the rain with my own gloves soaked through. I told myself that if I became more, my wife would settle back into love. I bought her a leather portfolio she'd pointed at in a boutique downtown. She said thanks, then asked if I considered getting an MBA, like a gift was a down payment on becoming somebody else. The city called me on a Tuesday afternoon and offered me the supervisor job. The salary bump was real. The title sounded good. My crew threw me a small celebration in the break room. Cupcakes from a grocery store, paper plates, genuine smiles. I drove home feeling something close to pride. When I told Imani, she nodded. Finally, she said, "Not congratulations. Not, I knew you could. Just finally." That was the moment I realized I was chasing a moving target, and she was the one holding the ruler. The next week, I came home early because a meeting got canceled. Our street was quiet, the kind of quiet where you hear a dog's nails on the sidewalk. I walked in and heard voices in the living room, Imani laughing, Caleb's voice low. I paused in the hallway. I didn't hear anything explicit, nothing I could name in a courtroom, but I heard warmth. I heard familiarity. Then I heard my name, and I heard Imani say, "He's good, but he's still not, you know." Caleb said something I couldn't make out. She laughed again, like agreement tasted sweet. I stepped into the room with my normal face on. Imani's smile flickered. Caleb stood up too fast, like someone who forgot the role he was playing. "Oh, you're home early," Imani said. Her voice had the smoothness of a closed door. I asked, "What's going on?" Caleb lifted his hands. "Just stopping by. We were talking about your new role." Imani nodded quickly. "We're proud of you." The "we" was strange, like they'd already formed a unit I wasn't part of. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Imani's breathing stayed steady beside me. I thought about my grandfather's watch in the drawer. Time, the only thing you can't earn back. I thought about how I'd spent months trying to prove I was enough instead of asking whether I was respected. I made my second big decision then. I wasn't going to beg. If something was happening, I would learn the truth quietly, protect myself, and refuse to perform heartbreak for people who didn't deserve it. I started small. I changed passwords to my personal accounts. I moved my savings to a separate bank. I checked our shared bills and printed statements, not to punish Imani, but to understand what belonged to whom. I documented what I paid for in the house, what we owned together, what was hers. It felt cold, but it was actually me finally acting like the grown man my father raised, prepared, not panicked. I also started talking to my cousin Nia, who was a paralegal, not for revenge, just clarity. A month passed, slow and heavy. Imani was kinder in a way that felt rehearsed. She'd pack my lunch. She'd text me heart emojis. Then she'd turn around and ask, "Are you thinking about applying for director roles next year?" I started seeing how affection could be used like seasoning to make criticism go down easier. Caleb stopped by more often, always when Imani knew I'd be on shift. When I asked him to meet up, he was suddenly swamped. The distance felt intentional, like he was trying to step out of my line of sight. In late summer, the truth showed up like a receipt you didn't ask for. I was at a downtown lunch spot, one of those places with overpriced sandwiches and loud espresso machines, when I saw Imani at a corner table. Caleb was with her, not across from her like colleagues. Next to her, shoulders almost touching. She leaned in and held his wrist while she talked, a small gesture that had no reason to exist unless it meant something. I froze near the pickup counter, the bag of food warm in my hands. They didn't see me. I left without eating. I walked along the waterfront afterward, watching seagulls argue over scraps, watching the ferry move like a slow promise. I wanted to storm back in and demand answers. I wanted to shout their names and make everyone stare. But I didn't. I stood there and let the reality settle. It wasn't just that my wife was betraying me. It was that my best friend was participating in a story where I was the obstacle, the stable man holding back their vision. And they were doing it with calm faces, like it was reasonable. That night, Imani came home and talked about traffic and a delayed meeting. I listened, nodding at the right moments. When she finished, she said, "You're quiet." I looked at her and asked, "Do you respect me?" Her eyes narrowed like she wasn't used to being asked direct questions. "Of course I respect you," she said. I held her gaze. "Then why do you talk about me like I'm a project?" She stared for a second, then turned toward the sink. "You're being sensitive," she said, and the conversation died there. 2 weeks later, Imani asked to go to brunch, an unusual request because weekends were usually catch-up time for her. We went to a bright place with a chalkboard menu and too many plants. She dressed like she was meeting an investor, not her husband. Halfway through, she took a sip of water and said, "I've been thinking about us." I didn't flinch. I already knew the script. "Okay," I said. She exhaled. "I don't think we want the same life. I want a partner who's always reaching, always growing. You're comfortable." I stared at the condensation on my glass and listened as if she was describing someone else. She kept going, voice soft. "You're good, Darius. You're kind, but I need more." Then she said the line again. "You're not ambitious enough." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel in public. "So what are you saying?" I asked. She looked relieved by my calm. "I think we should separate," she said, like it was a mature option. I made a third decision quiet but important. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I said, if that's what you want, we'll do it correctly. Imani blinked. Correctly? We'll talk to a mediator. We'll sort the house. We'll be respectful. Her shoulders loosened, like she'd expected a scene. Thank you, she said. I didn't say you're welcome. I just looked at her and realized she wanted the breakup to be clean, because she already had somewhere to land. We moved through the separation like co-workers closing out a project. Imani packed her things with efficiency, labeling boxes, stacking them neatly. She took her art books, her work files, her clothing. She left behind the cinnamon roll pan because she said she didn't bake anyway. When she stood at the door with her last bag, she said, I hope we could be friends. I said, I hope we could be honest. Her face tightened for half a second. Then she smiled again. Of course, she said and walked out. Caleb didn't call me after that. Not once. Not to check on me. Not to explain anything. The silence was its own confession. I didn't reach out either. I went to work. I trained my new supervisors. I fixed a signal fault that could have shut down the whole line during rush hour. I went to my barber and sat in the chair while Reggie talked about his son's football game like nothing had changed. I went home to a house that felt too quiet, and I learned what loneliness sounded like when it didn't have an argument to fill it. 3 months later, the engagement announcement hit my phone like a slap. It was a glossy photo. Imani's hand with a ring that caught the light, Caleb smiling beside her. The caption talked about finding alignment and building a future. Friends commented heart emojis and congratulations. I stared at it until my eyes went dry. It wasn't just that she moved on quickly. It was who she moved on with. My best friend. The man who called me brother. The man who knew my father's name, my mother's laugh, my weaknesses. I didn't reply. I didn't post. I didn't send a long message. I sat at my kitchen table and opened the drawer with my grandfather's watch. I held it in my palm and listened to the tiny ticking. Time. I thought about calling Caleb and unloading everything I'd held back. I thought about sending Imani a message that would ruin her appetite for weeks. Then I made another decision. I wouldn't chase their shame. If they had any, it would find them on its own schedule. I focused on my schedule. The wedding was set for early spring in Baltimore, Maryland. Imani's cousin lived there, and she wanted East Coast elegance. I heard this through mutual friends and through my own family, who were confused and hurt on my behalf. My aunt asked me, "Are you going?" Like she couldn't imagine I wouldn't. I told her, "No." She said, "You should show your face. Let them see you." I didn't want to be a prop in their storyline. I told myself I was done. But I also knew something. Unfinished betrayal leaves loose threads. In the months leading up to the wedding, I kept noticing consequences stacking up around them. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real life. Imani's firm posted a new project lead role, and she didn't get it. A mutual friend told me she'd been written up for missing deadlines. Caleb changed jobs twice in 6 months, chasing commissions, trying to look bigger than he was. They were building a public image of power couple, but behind it, they sounded stressed. That didn't make me happy. It made me tired. I wanted my peace more than I wanted their downfall. Then something unexpected happened. I got invited to Baltimore. Not by them, by my mother. She was attending a church conference the same weekend as their wedding. "Come with me," she said. "Not for them. For me. I don't like flying alone." I hadn't taken a real trip since the separation. Part of me wanted to decline. Another part of me felt a strange pull, like life was presenting a final page I hadn't read yet. I agreed, telling myself it was for my mother. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Baltimore in spring felt different from Tacoma's gray. The air had warmth and a smell of water and old brick. My mother and I stayed near the inner harbor. In the mornings, she went to her conference, and I walked, letting my thoughts stretch out. I passed corner stores and coffee shops and a park where kids chase each other like the world was safe. I called my cousin Nia and told her I was in town. She said, "Please don't do anything stupid." I said, "I'm not built for stupid. I'm built for clarity." The day before the wedding, I ran into Caleb by accident. Or maybe it wasn't an accident. I was at a small diner getting coffee when he walked in wearing a suit bag over his shoulder. He saw me and stopped so hard the door almost swung back. His mouth opened like he wasn't sure which version of himself to present. "Darius," he said. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. I looked at him. "Caleb." He swallowed. "You're here." "My mother's in town," I said. I didn't add anything else. Silence did the explaining. He tried to smile. "Look, man." I cut him off gently. "Don't." My calm seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He leaned closer. I didn't plan for it to happen like that. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. "But it happened," I said, "and you didn't say a word." He looked down at his shoes. I didn't know what to say. I nodded. That's the part one understands now. When people benefit from your pain, they suddenly run out of words. He asked if we could talk privately. I could have said yes. I could have demanded the whole truth. But I made a choice. I didn't want his version of events as a gift he offered on his terms. "No," I said. "I'm not here for closure from you." His face tightened. "You think you're better than me now?" I looked at him, surprised at the childishness. "No," I said. "I think I'm finally better for myself." I left the diner, and my hands didn't shake. That's how I knew I was healing. The wedding day arrived with clear skies. My mother went to her conference event. I sat in the hotel room, thinking about whether I should stay inside and let the day pass. Then Nia called. "Imani's mother is asking about you," she said. "They think you might show up." I laughed once, without humor. "Why?" Nia sighed. "Because people like neat story. They want you to either bless it or curse it. Either way, you make it feel complete." I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't want to complete their story, but I did want to complete mine. I didn't have an invitation. I didn't show up to cause a scene. I went to the venue early, during the hour when staff were still moving chairs and adjusting flowers. It was a restored historic hall near the water, all white columns and polished wood. I wore a simple suit. I walked like a guest who belonged, because I did belong in any room I entered. An event coordinator stopped me. "Sir, are you on the list?" I said, "I'm family on the groom's side." The lie tasted bitter. She nodded and waved me through. I found a seat in the back. The room filled slowly with people dressed in their best, laughter rising like bubbles. I saw Imani's co-workers, her cousins, a few faces from Tacoma who'd flown out because they liked the destination wedding. I kept my posture relaxed. My heart wasn't racing. It was heavy, like a book you'd already read, but still had to carry. Then I saw Imani in her dress. Beautiful, controlled, eyes bright with performance. Caleb stood at the front, hands clasped, trying to look like a man who deserved what he'd taken. The ceremony began. Music. A minister with a kind voice. Vows that sounded like they'd been edited for an audience. I listened for any mention of truth. There wasn't any. "I promise to honor you," Caleb said, and I felt a tightness in my chest. Not because I wanted her back, but because honor was being used as decoration. When it was over, people clapped. I stayed seated until most of the crowd shifted toward the reception area. Then I stood and walked out before anyone could decide what my presence meant. I didn't want to be photographed in their memory. At the reception, I kept to the edges. A waiter passed with sparkling water, and I took a glass. I heard laughter and the clink of utensils. Imani moved through the room like a host, hugging people, smiling wide. She looked in her element. Caleb looked restless, like he wasn't used to the spotlight without a script. I noticed something else, too. A man in a suit talking to the venue manager with an expression that didn't match the celebration. He held a folder. He was pointing at a clipboard. His face was all business. A few minutes later, the DJ lowered the music unexpectedly. The room's sound changed, like someone turned down the heartbeat. The man with the folder stepped near the head table. Caleb's smile faltered. Imani looked confused. The man spoke quietly to Caleb, but I was close enough to see Caleb's posture stiffen. Then Caleb raised his voice a little, trying to keep it casual. "Now!" "Really?" The man stayed calm. People began turning in their seats. Curious, Imani leaned toward Caleb, whispering sharply. Caleb's jaw clenched like he was chewing anger. A woman at the next table leaned toward her friend. What's going on? Her friend shrugged. The man with the folder spoke again, firmer this time. The venue manager approached too, nervous. Suddenly, Imani stood up, trying to smile. Hi, everyone, she said, voice too bright. We're having a small administrative issue. Please enjoy your dinner. The word administrative landed like a fake bandage. The man with the folder didn't move. Caleb's face had drained of color. I recognized that look. It was a look of a plan collapsing in public. The truth, as I learned later, wasn't mystical. It was paperwork. Caleb had been sued by a former client months earlier for breach of contract. He'd ignored it, assuming he could settle later. A judgment had been entered. The client attorney had filed a lien and arranged for service related to financial disclosure. On a day Caleb couldn't easily dodge. The venue manager needed confirmation of payment because the card used for final charges had been flagged. Something about a freeze. Suddenly the perfect wedding had a crack, and everyone could see it. Karma didn't shout. It filed forms. Caleb tried to recover with charm. He stepped to the microphone for a toast earlier than planned, laughing too hard. Love always wins, he said, and a few people clapped weakly. Imani smiled like her teeth were holding her face up. I watched her eyes scan the room, calculating who noticed what. Then Caleb said something that didn't belong in his speech. I'm grateful we found each other when we did, he said. Even back when things were complicated. Imani's head snapped toward him. Her eyes flashed a warning. Caleb kept talking anyway, like the nerves loosened his senses. He rambled about late-night talks and how she understood him when nobody else did. And the timeline in his words drifted backward. Past the official breakup date, they'd told everyone. You could feel the room doing math. Imani's cousin frowned. A woman from Tacoma, someone who'd attended my housewarming years ago, looked down at her plate like she didn't want to witness it. Caleb laughed again, then said, Some people weren't built for the kind of life we're building. The sentence was aimed at me even if he didn't know I was there. It was also a confession dressed as confidence. Imani stepped in fast, cut him off with a kiss and a joke. The DJ raised the music. People smiled again, but the warmth was thinner. When guests think they've been manipulated, they don't confront you immediately. They collect data quietly. They watch who looks nervous. They listen to what your family doesn't say. That night, the reception continued, but something had changed. The celebration felt like an event being held together by tape. I left early. Outside, the air smelled like water and car exhaust. I breathed it in like relief. Back at the hotel, my mother asked how my day was. I told her the truth without details. I saw them, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, and I shook my head. I'm done, I said. She reached for my hand. Good, she said softly, because you can't build a life on someone else's collapse. You build it on your own character. My mother had a way of saying things that felt simple until you carried them around and realized they were heavy with wisdom. I slept deeply that night. When we returned to Tacoma, the fallout traveled faster than I expected. People asked careful questions. So, when did you and Imani separate? Did Caleb talk to you afterward? I answered without bitterness. We separated last summer. Caleb stopped calling before that. I didn't need to accuse them. The inconsistencies did the accusing. Imani called me once, late at night. I let it go to voicemail. She texted, Why were you there? I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. I refused to be recruited into her panic. Months passed. My supervisor job became real work, not just a title. I ran schedules. I handled emergencies. I also started teaching a night course at a community college, Intro to Transit Systems, because I liked passing knowledge on. My students were mostly working adults trying to change their lives quietly. Their ambition wasn't loud. It was steady, and being around them reminded me that ambition could mean patience, discipline, and pride in doing a job well, not just chasing applause. I started going to therapy, too. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I ignored disrespect. Imani and Caleb's public image kept trying to stand, but the cracks widened. A friend told me Imani switched firms. Another said Caleb was in a lawsuit mess. They moved to a nicer apartment and posted photos like proof. But I learned something. When people are insecure, they curate. When people are secure, they live. I stopped checking, stopped listening. I started running again, early mornings along the waterfront, headphones off, so I could hear my own breath. I started cooking for myself, not to impress anyone, just because I deserve care. A year after the wedding, I met Simone at a museum fundraiser in Seattle. She was a black woman with a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to dominate a room. She worked as a compliance officer for a hospital system and spoke about ethics like it was a real thing, not a slogan. We talked beside a painting of a stormy sea. I told her I was divorced. She didn't flinch or ask for gossip. She asked, "What did you learn?" Nobody had asked me that before. Not what happened, but what did you learn? That question felt like a door opening. Simone and I moved slowly. We had coffee in little bookstores. We sat on buses and watched the city move. She met my mother early because she said, "I don't want to date in secrecy." The first time Simone visited my house, she noticed my grandfather's pocket watch on the shelf and asked about it. I told her the story. She listened and said, "Keep it visible. You don't need to hide your history." I realized how much of my marriage to Imani had been about hiding parts of myself that didn't match her desired image. One rainy afternoon, I saw Imani again by chance, outside a grocery store. She looked thinner, not just in body but in spirit. She saw me and hesitated, then approached like she was walking into cold water. "Darius," she said. "Hi," I said. She looked at the ground. "I heard you're teaching now." "Yeah," I said. She nodded slowly. "Good for you." The words sounded real, almost painful. I waited. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just said, "You always were steady." I looked at her. "Steady isn't a flaw," I said. She swallowed and walked away. That interaction did something strange. It released the last bit of anger I didn't know I was holding, because I saw her clearly, not as a villain, not as a prize, but as a person who confused hunger for happiness. I saw Caleb as someone who wanted shortcuts to identity, and I saw myself as a man who tried to earn love by reshaping his life to fit someone else's measurement. My life now wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Simone and I built it in small, honest ways. Shared calendars, honest conversations, laughter that didn't feel like performance. Here's what I carry from all of it. When Imani told me I wasn't ambitious enough, I tried to translate her insult into a work plan, new title, new salary, new proof. But the real issue showed up in smaller moments. Her laughing at my expense in the barbershop, the way finally replaced congratulations, the way Caleb's silence acted like a confession. And at that wedding, what broke the illusion wasn't a dramatic fight. It was a quiet collapse of accountability, the paperwork, the nervous timeline in a toast. If someone needs you feel small so they can feel large, you're not in a partnership. You're in a display. When you set a boundary, like choosing not to argue at brunch or walking away from a diner conversation you don't owe, people who wanted your reaction will call it cold. Let them. Calm is often the first real sign you're choosing yourself. I didn't win because Imani and Caleb struggled. I won because I stopped letting their idea of ambition define my worth, and I built a life that doesn't require anyone's approval to feel solid. If you're listening to this and you're in the early stage, where respect is slipping, but you're still making excuses, please don't wait for a wedding day to see the truth. If this story hits you in the chest even a little, seriously, it helps more than you think. Subscribe for more first-person relationship and drama stories with real consequences, and share this with someone who keeps confusing ambition with disrespect. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew the marriage was already over? The end.